Okay, so hey guys, welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Ramirez versus Billam-Smith fight. So if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Ramirez is 46-1 with 30 KOs, and Billam-Smith is 20-1 with 13 KOs. This fight is for the WBO and WBA World Cruiserweight titles. Ramirez's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Billam-Smith, and Billam-Smith's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Riakporhe. Ramirez is a southpaw, and to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, like I say, this is a unification fight for both. It's a fight in which has perhaps been a long time coming. I mean, realistically, it's always been talked about a fight like this happening, but at the same time, it's kind of been dreamt about at the same time. You've never really seen boxer working with Golden Boy, but in this newest installment of the Riyadh season and the effect it's been making and everything it's been doing, we are now seeing this happening. Boxer, of course, now working with Golden Boy, and it's a good mix. It's an exciting mix. It's a mix, like I say, we haven't seen before. I mean, seeing Ben Shalom next to Oscar De La Hoya was quite an interesting thing to see, and like I say, it's something new. It's something we haven't seen before. De La Hoya is putting out some of his biggest, if not his biggest names onto this show. I mean, I'm going to speak about the undercard in just a moment, but it is a great undercard, and like I say, it's the biggest names involved realistically from Golden Boy. You know, there is some other big ones as well, but the majority of the bigger ones are involved in this card, and like I say, it's a great showing. I'm very much intrigued for it. Like I say, it's the Riyadh season effect, this arguably being possibly the weakest of the Riyadh season shows. Still, it's high level. I mean, there's still big fights on it, big matchups, and fights in which we never would have thought to happen, like this main event, and fights which perhaps could have happened earlier with the likes of, like I say, Ramirez versus Barboza Jr., which I'm going to talk about in just a moment, but just needed that little bit of an extra push to happen and a little bit more extra encouragement, and now it's happened, of course, with Riyadh season. As Ramirez as a fighter, though, of course, he's now kind of cemented himself as a cruiserweight. I mean, that win versus Guillamarian was an excellent win, possibly the best win of his career. I mean, performance-wise, he performed so well, and I'm going to speak about him as a fighter in a moment. But like I say, he's now kind of cemented himself somewhat in the Mexican Hall of Fame, which is, you know, obviously not really a thing, but like, it's so impressive what he's both been able to achieve, because becoming the first cruiserweight Mexican world champion from what I believe, whilst also being the first Mexican super middleweight champion when he was super middleweight champion back in, I believe, 2016. So, you know, he's cemented himself in that kind of Hall of Fame type legacy. I think in general as well, he's improved after the loss. I think moving weight for him has benefited him, but I also think the loss versus Bivol did benefit him as well. I think he has learned a lot. I think he's improved a lot as a fighter. I think he's become a bit more of a well-rounded type fighter, and like I say, in general has improved a lot. And I think Billam-Smith is taking this fight against him possibly in the toughest time of his career, or the best time in Ramirez's career. And so, you know, it's going to be an interesting contest. Of course, Billam-Smith, he's been built up, hyped up by Boxer. He's had multiple stadium fights now. He's been perhaps the underdog in certain fights and has gone to other guys' backyards, like say in that last fight versus Riakporhe, and had success and been able to get big wins. But there is seemingly a difference between British and kind of the world scene, and there's been many a times in which we have seen a British fighter who's, you know, perhaps just a world level contender or a world champion himself go on to go abroad and to fight. You know, they normally go to America and fight an American, or go to Mexico and fight a Mexican, and then lose. And you know, you got to think it's going to be a lot. It's going to take a lot for Billam-Smith to win this fight. He's the clear underdog in this one, and I respect him a lot for taking this fight, like I mentioned. But it's going to be an interesting feat if he is able to do it. Like I say, it's a huge win, and it's a huge risk, and it's about time that they're realistically, Boxer is taking these type of risks with their fighters. But in general, it's going to be a very tough task, and in general, it's also going to be interesting to see how this fight sells. I mean, Saudi and Riyadh season in general has had backlash upon the selling of their fights. Obviously, this one, from what I believe, also being in Saudi as well, it's not, like I say, it is the weakest of the Riyadh season cards, even though it's still a great card. But does that mean it's going to sell even less? Is the atmosphere going to be even worse? things like that. I think if this was a fight that was in Mexico, then it would be a huge kind of bringing together of Mexican fans. Mexican fans always get behind their fighters, and I'm sure they would for Zerda Ramirez again. But I don't necessarily know how well Billam-Smith sells. You know, he's done stadium fights multiple times, so he clearly does sell well, but he's still not a huge British kind of household name yet. And perhaps if he is able to win this fight, perhaps that kind of is another step along towards being that. And so, you know, like I say, this is a great show, a great card, and a great main event fight. And to speak about the undercard fights, you know, just a few of them, not all of them, but just the main kind of ones in my opinion. Also on this card is Ramirez versus Barboza Jr. It's, like I say, a very good matchup, a matchup in which perhaps could have been made a while ago. It was just two Golden Boy fighters against each other, so it was always going to be perhaps the easiest one to be made, and it's been talked about for a while. I mean, Barboza Jr., since, you know, even when he was with Top Rank, he was calling out the likes of Ramirez when Ramirez was with Top Rank as well. So, you know, they've seemingly both kind of progressed into where they are now. You know, Barboza Jr. hasn't fought the level of opposition in which Ramirez has. Ramirez is perhaps coming off a poor performance versus Delorme, but then also Barboza Jr. is also coming off a poor performance. So I think they're both coming off just not the best of fights. I think Ramirez has been suffering with his defense as of recent. It's not been excellent. I think, you know, he got dropped even though it wasn't classed as getting dropped in that fight versus Delorme, because Delorme, you know, punched after and then apparently shoved him, and like I say, it was weird. It should have been counted as a knockdown. Then he probably should have had a point taken off him, Delorme, for punching multiple times after he'd been knocked down. But like I say, nonetheless, Ramirez was hurt in that fight multiple times, didn't make the necessary adjustments. I think defensively he was poor. I think he's a good body puncher, but I don't think he sets off his shots with his jab. And then Barboza Jr. was frustrated in that fight um, versus McComb. It was a performance in which McComb arguably should have won. McComb was outboxing him realistically on the back foot, was just picking shots and landing clean, wasn't really getting into too kind of close exchanges with Barboza Jr., wasn't being too aggressive to invite or accept the pressure of Barboza Jr. It's going to be an interesting fight, this one. Like I say, two guys coming off a poor performance. You would like to hope that one of them will shine. Of course, like I say, Ramirez fought at this level and perhaps hasn't had the success at this level. Of course, he fought Josh Taylor when Josh Taylor was in the height of his career and then lost that one. But then Barboza Jr. just hasn't fought at this level yet and has struggled, like I say, against the long paper, lower level type fighters. I think that Ramirez is going to win via TKO in round 9. Perhaps that's a surprising thing to say, but I think Ramirez is going to continuously come forwards. I think Barboza Jr. might have success with the straight shots that he lands that are nice, but I think Ramirez is going to continue with the pressure. Even though he's going to get caught with shots, I don't think he should change his game plan. I think realistically, both of their last fights were against fighters who were just bad for them stylistic wise. I mean, Barboza Jr. McComb was bad for him stylistic wise, a continuous mover and, you know, one punch type mover, and was willing to just sit on the back foot and kind of continue to move all fights. But then Ramirez Delorme was that more of a power puncher who was going to just continue to kind of load in heavy shots, and Ramirez was continuously getting caught. But I don't think Barboza Jr. is as hard as a puncher as Ramirez. I think, like I say, Ramirez is going to put on more pressure. Barboza Jr. might be able to fight better on the back foot, but like I say, if Ramirez gets his bodywork going, I could see Barboza Jr. get drawn into a fight, and then perhaps that's where Ramirez wins and gets that stoppage and kind of shows his senior level and shows that he is still a good body puncher and is still able to hurt opponents and still able to have success at a high level. And then, you know, realistically, perhaps there are other big fights available to him, but it would be interesting to see where he would progress on to next if he does win this fight. Also, Zepeda versus Farmer is on this card. It was, you know, an interesting matchup to see. It's for the WBC Interim World Lightweight title. It's now just recently been made for that, which is realistically just because they want to make Zepeda versus Stevenson. So there's no real surprise that they've put this as a matchup for that belt. And, you know, like I say, it's just an interesting matchup. I mean, Farmer coming off the loss versus Muratala, where he didn't perform badly at all, but he, you know, that's not a level to be able to, you know, you don't normally lose that fight and then go on to fight somebody who's just beaten Cabrera, which, you know, Cabrera was only had that one loss versus Cruz, which was a split decision, and he got destroyed realistically by Zepeda. And there was a couple of rounds for Zepeda kind of working into it and getting his whereabouts and getting the job done and getting his body work going. But Farmer just isn't a step up in opponent for Zepeda. It was meant to seemingly be Cambosos Jr. I would have probably much preferred that fight, even though Cambosos Jr. is got what 2 wins in his past 5. Them 2 wins have been against high level fighters in, of course, Teofimo Lopez and then also Maxi Hughes as well, which was a controversial decision, I suppose, to say the least. But like I say, I don't think this is a step up. I think it's another continual progression fights, but this might be the last one before we then see the big one versus Shakur Stevenson, which is still a fight which I really love to see and really am hoping will be made next. I think that Zepeda will win via KO in round 4. I think it's going to be another destructive performance where he's going to be able to hurt Farmer and just punish him. Farmer, like I say, isn't a bad fighter, but it's going to be a statement for him to get stopped. But like I say, I don't think he's able to. I don't think he's going to be able to manage Zepeda, and he's a completely different fighter to that of Muratalla. And yeah, I think Zepeda, like I say, is on a real high at the moment, on a real destructive run, and again is going to be able to get another impressive stoppage win. And then also on this card, the final fight in which I'm going to talk about, which in my opinion is a very underrated fight. I think it's an excellent fight. I think it's the best versus the best in the division. That is Neomtrong versus Collazo. Like I say, I think it's an excellent fight. Like I say, best versus best. Neomtron coming off a very good win versus Winwood, where Winwood was 4-0. Winwood was the one with the momentum. Neomtron, it was surprising to see the fight even happen in the first place because Neomtron hadn't really left Thailand and hadn't fought in 2 years, and then all of a sudden he was fighting in Winwood in his home country of Australia, and of course still managed to get the win and put on a good performance and kind of showed things up for Winwood, and showed that he wasn't there yet. He's not able to just blast through things, and the confident young fighter, he was able to disrupt that and was able to get a win through that way. And Neomtrong's been champion since 2016. He's been a champion for the longest of times. I think he is the longest reigning current world champion in boxing at the moment, which is, like I say, perhaps he hasn't been the most active in the past couple of years, but that is still an incredible feat. And for him to be able to come back and, like I say, get a win like he did last time out, which was still a close fight, but Neomtrong was able to show his experience. I definitely think so in that fight. And then he's then against Collazo, who has been progressing very fast as well, similar to that of Winwood, but has been, I think, a bit more of a complete fighter in my opinion. Collazo obviously did get dropped or hurt. I don't think he actually got dropped. He got hurt in that last fight versus Zapata, but then went on to put on another clinique of a performance where he just completely broke down Zapata, and with the attacking fighting style in which he has, he was still just kind of too much, even though it went on to a unanimous decision. This fight is for both the WBA and the WBO World Minimum Weight titles. It's about time to see these matchups be made in the minimum weight division. I think it's going to draw more attraction to the division when you're seeing the best versus the best. I think, like I say, it's about time. I think it's a division which hasn't really been put on too much notice. It's not really had too much attention drawn to it. But I think Collazo is going to win via unanimous decision. I think Neomtrong versus Winwood. I think Winwood fought more to kind of Neomtrong's style. I think he was a bit nervous. I think he was staying at mid-range. He had a lower guard. It was that confident, but also perhaps a little bit nervous, younger type style. But Collazo, like I say, I think is a much more well-rounded fighter. I think he'll be able to catch shots from Neomtrong, then respond back with superior speed, put on more pressure, prolonged pressure throughout the whole of the fight, and then be able to win, like I say, via unanimous decision, which is a huge win for him. I mean, like I say, beating the best guy in the division, I don't realistically think that there's much left for Collazo to do. He could go on to become undisputed champion in the minimum weight division. Perhaps it seems like the minimum weight is actually moving in that direction, but when you look at the other champions, there isn't many huge names, big names. I mean, Jerusalem is another one of the champions, and Collazo already beat Jerusalem very impressively. And so, like I say, I don't think there's much for him left to achieve in that division. It's been great to see him be put on notice by Golden Boy, and he's arguably one of the biggest kind of champions or best fighters in my opinion from Golden Boy, but just like I say, hasn't been given that same kind of credit just because he is in the lower weight division. But I think this fight will give him that kind of credit and that give him them cards to play with, and it's going to be interesting to see where he goes next because he is, small realistically for the minimum weight division. He's really not a big guy, and if he goes up, perhaps he could go up into light flyweight, and there is some good fights there to be made. But I think he'll be small for that. So, like I say, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. But I think he's going to be able to put on a very good performance versus Yomchong and really, like I say, put the division on kind of notice and put it on a stage which it deserves. Moving on back to the main event now, Ramirez as a fighter, I think he moves well, and I think he's a continuous moving target. And against Gulamarian, I think he moved excellently. I believe that there was times where he planted his feet and kind of pushed Gulamarian back and did that well, but then also when he was on the ropes, he wasn't really kind of just sitting on the ropes. He wasn't just letting Gulamarian tee off. He was continuously moving, making Gulamarian question himself, and that's where realistically he showed his level of skill superior to that of Gulamarian, showed his IQ is superior, and in the end Gulamarian just had nothing to be able to match it with Ramirez. He, like I say, plants his feet well. I think he's got a good balanced stance. It's quite a wide stance, but he seems to be able to control it well and kind of help him defensive wise, with the good head movement that he does possess at times, and yeah, in general balanced to be able to help him kind of sneak in sneaky shots in which he does do. I think that's also down to the balanced stance in which he has. He's becoming more controlled as a fighter. I think his work is becoming less messy. Like I say, I think he has improved from that fight, from that loss versus Bivol, and in general is becoming more of a controlled fighter who is able to do his best work but not just be messy at the same time. I think he can fight at a mid or an in close range very well. He's accurate. I think his accuracy, like I say, is again improving with that control improving as well. I think he rolls under shots well, and again, that's another reason why he can kind of sneak up sneaky shots as well. He's got good punch variation. He's got solid counters. Was continuously catching Gulamarian with counters, and I think Billam-Smith perhaps might attack similarly to that of Gulamarian to an extent. So if his defense isn't on point, he can definitely get caught with the counters in which Ramirez will try and probably go on with. He's not really loading up on his shots and was continuously just landing good combinations and was just in general catching shots, responding with shots. It was a brilliant performance last time out versus Gulamarian, and I think he's also got a good chin as well. But I also think both of these fighters have got a good chin, so I think it's going to take a lot for either of them to be stopped, and I think they've both proved that from performances prior. Negatives by him, I think he does invite pressure. I think he will willingly go onto the back foot, and that is something in which Billam-Smith will openly take. I think he'll probably appreciate that. I think it'll be something that's a bit refreshing for him just to be able to go onto the back foot and not have quite as messy of a fight, quite as frustrating as a fight. Billam-Smith has fought Riakporhe and Okoli, and both of them a lot of the time were just kind of hugging and clinching and not really making the fighters fun. But I think Ramirez will let him come forward, but then not necessarily just clinch. I think, like I say, it will move well and it will be a more entertaining fight as a whole than what of Billam-Smith is used to in recent times. I think he squares his feet up, Ramirez. I think he can stand straight in front of you at times when he is trying to be physical to push forwards. He will stand in front of you by doing that and not really load and not really fire shots all the time when he's doing that. He can wait for you to throw sometimes and perhaps wait a little bit too long, and Billam-Smith might like that with the physicality in which Billam-Smith does have. He can get drawn into a fight, I think, at times. Like I say, I don't think that's the same as what he used to be, but he can still get drawn into a fight. If he plants his feet too long, like I say, I think that doesn't necessarily, I think that's something that's going to go into his favour. He's the less physical, I believe, out of the two of them, and I think sometimes he does lead with his head as well, and Billam-Smith can definitely catch him with shots if he's doing that with Billam-Smith also having good shot variation, in which is something in which I think he's improved on. Also, to carry on speaking about Billam-Smith as well, I think he's got good at dealing with pressure. Like I say, that physical pressure, I think he can handle that well. And like I say, coming off fights with the likes of Okoli and the likes of Riakporhe, he had to deal with that physicality of the big, strong fighters. And Ramirez, perhaps not being the natural cruiserweight, is going to be smaller for this fight. And like I say, I think he's going to be the less physical. And even if he does come with pressure, I think Billam-Smith's going to be able to handle that. He gives his all in all his fights, Billam-Smith, and I think he's proven that multiple times now. He works off his jab well. I think he imposes his size. He lets his hands go. He can fight at a mid or an in close range, and even as a big guy with quite rangy, weapons, he can still fight in close well. He's got high guard. He walks you down. He is good at working in frustrating positions, like I've been mentioning. He's got good short shots. He's physical. He's improving in his combinations, I think, as well, and that's something which I suppose you got to credit his team for. I think he is improving in combinations, and I think he's got a good chin. Negatives about him, I think his head movement is limited. I think in general his defense can be limited, and perhaps more limited than that of Ramirez is. His speed, I think, is lesser. He's not going to be the guy kind of sneaking in them sneaky shots. I think he ducks down a little bit. He doesn't really realistically reset defensively that well. I think he stands quite tall. I think he's there to be hit. I think he also squares up. I think he leaves his shots out sometimes, and like his jab, I think he leaves it out. And Ramirez, if he's able to get them counters going, might have success with that. I think he can get caught with overhands. He does sink back into the ropes seemingly with every fight. He, I think, struggles against movers a bit, and I don't think that's going to favour him against Ramirez. He's perhaps can lazily throw his shots into the later rounds and not, like I say, not bring them back, and can be just flinging them out for the sake of it a little bit. His straight shots are good, but sometimes I think they're just, that he's using them a bit too much, or using them in close a bit too much, and he can be hurt to the body. And he's coming off a broken rib not too long ago against Masternak, and that seemed to really kind of slow things down. I think he was losing that fight versus Masternak, and he was fortunate that Masternak also got injured and then had to pull out. So, like I say, that was a fight which definitely wasn't his best, and he's shown that he can be hurt to the body and had that broken rib. So if he gets opened up again, Ramirez has good body work and probably will utilise that. Ramirez is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Ramirez will win via unanimous decision. I think it's going to be perhaps a war of a fight a little bit, but I think Ramirez is ultimately going to be able to just be too much. I think he's going to be the more skilled fighter who's moving, catching Billam-Smith with sneaky shots, just continually, like I say, being a frustrating target who isn't going to be able to just play into Billam-Smith's game, not just going to tie up when he wants him to tie up, and perhaps, might be physical at times, which might go into Billam-Smith's favour, but in general, I think Ramirez is the more skilled fighter and is going to be able to just outwork him and then have success and be able to confuse Billam-Smith at times with his movement and his mixture of a game plan. Then who could go on to fight next? Ramirez. I mean, it's interesting. I don't necessarily know who he could go on to fight next. I mean, Billam-Smith is probably the biggest name. Well, one of the biggest names in cruiserweight division. He could go on to fight Opataya next. Will we see that happen? Perhaps we will. With Riyadh season and everything that's going on with that, we could see that happen. If not, there's a few other fighters like Mikhailian. That's a fight that could make sense. He could move up to heavyweight. He could move up to. He could go back down to light heavyweight and fight someone like a Benavidez. Like I say, I think there's multiple different options there, but I don't think he's going to want to take it realistically a step down. Perhaps he might want to go into the undisputed route, and it wouldn't surprise me. But of course, he would have to get through the likes of like an Opataya, which would be a great fight, and I'm sure everybody would love to see that. But yeah, like I say, there is options there available. I think in general for this whole card, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the winners of each one, because they are talking about doing a Matchroom versus Golden Boy 5v5, and it'd be a great kind of spectacle, huge draw. But then also you got the likes of, like I say, Ramirez versus Opataya, but then you also got the winner of Ramirez versus Barboza versus Cattrall. Then you've got the likes of Zepeda versus Stevenson. And, like I said, there's big fights there to be made. I mean, Duarte, who's also on this card, versus Akhmedov, if he's able to win that one, he could then go on to fight somebody that's a matchroom fighter. There's multiple fights there to be made. It could be an interesting time if it is, that a 5v5 that gets made, if it's even just matchups that get made on this February 22nd card, in which there's been a lot of talk about and is seemingly a really big card, a really big show. Then I'm excited to see it, and I can't wait to see it. And in general, this show is on a jam-packed weekend of combat sports, which is a great weekend of combat sports. Perhaps is actually going under the radar a little bit and isn't being talked about enough, but hopefully it will deliver and make a brilliant fight for the fans who do watch it. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you didn't, like the video, subscribe if you are new, and thanks for watching.